Tune in today as I continue the discussion of measuring ROI in our business, specifically as it relates to podcast pitching and guesting. I'm pulling back the curtains on all the metrics we track for our clients, myself included, how we use those numbers to inform our strategy, and how you can do the same in your own business. Hey there, pitches. Welcome to the Go Pitch Yourself podcast with me, Angie Trueblood, a self-proclaimed podcast junkie. I'm on a mission to rid the world of the crappy pitches that are filling up inboxes everywhere. Want to help? Then let's get pitching. Hey there, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Go Pitch Yourself podcast. I hope this episode finds you happy and healthy. We are going to dig right into our content because I love this subject. It allows me to be the total numbers geek that I am at heart. So get prepared, get your calculator and your spreadsheets ready. Before we dig in, I want to read one of the really sweet reviews that was left for my podcast on Apple Podcast. This is by Erin, who I know who she is, Erin O'Lilla. Sometimes it's kind of hard because your Apple Podcast screen name is sometimes a little different than your real name. This one was Reinventing Erin, but she gave it away in her description. But it was very kind. And again, I'm so appreciative of when you guys go out there and do leave a rating and a review. It helps others find the show. And also, once they stumble upon it, it kind of gives a bit of social proof, just like your Amazon reviews, that this podcast is legit and that the content in it is really helpful. So Erin said, Angie Trueblood is such a gem. Toot, toot. She did not write that. I just said it. Truly, she is so knowledgeable and she freely shares that knowledge because she wants people to succeed. I feel so fortunate to be on this podcast, parentheses, episode number 17. Check it out, pals. But more so, I feel so fortunate I can listen to it every single week. It's literally one of the only podcasts that I listen to every single episode. There's no skipping this goodness. Thank you, Erin. I loved having her on the show, and I know I've mentioned it before, but if you have not listened to episode 17, do yourself a favor, go do that. I've gotten so many messages from folks who had really great outcomes by putting into practice some of the suggestions that Erin and I talked about. So listen to that episode if you are looking for actionable tips that can move your visibility game forward in a really short amount of time. So, last week on the podcast, we talked a bit with Danielle Hayden about the whole idea of ROI and making sure that we're familiar with it enough to know that when we invest in our business or really make any sort of decision in our business, that we are evaluating all the different components, right? The time component, the financial component, the impact it might have on our business. So, all of the ways to measure ROI. And I thought coming out of that, it could be really helpful for you to understand all of the different ways to measure the impact that podcast guesting is having on your business. So if you have been listening to the show and are starting to put into action some of the suggestions and tips and strategies that I've talked about, then you may be at the point of wondering, is this even making a difference? And how do I know if it is? So I thought I would just deep dive into the different numbers that we track for our one-to-one clients. These are the same numbers that I myself track. And I can actually give you a little bit of insight into how I am getting a bit more granular. I hate that word because it's so overused, but really I am. And how I'm starting to track things since I've also incorporated Facebook ads into my business. So for each of these, I thought it would be great to talk about what to track, how to track it, and then indicators that you are crushing it in the podcast guesting game. So, again, these are numbers to start using as you have episodes that go live. What can you do and how can you track if you're actually growing your business and having some sort of impact on it from podcast guesting? Now, before I dig into the actual specifics, you might be wondering, well, where do you keep all these numbers in a notebook? No. So I do think as I was prepping for this episode, I don't think we ever had client dashboards back when I started working with Danielle Hayden. I know on my own, I tracked numbers in my business, but they weren't really correlated to a podcast because at that point I didn't have one. But when Danielle and I started working together with her being a client, and then when I actually hired her to do my bookkeeping, this whole concept of a client dashboard really became appealing because we wanted to create something to where our clients could always go to a particular spot, see what we've been doing on their behalf, and that we could month after month track some of the impact it was having. So that's really where our client dashboard came from. It's a Google Sheet and it has two tabs. One are all the places that we have pitched our clients and really the outcome. Like, did we just pitch and we didn't hear back? Was it accepted? Was it recorded? All of that kind of stuff. That's one tab. And then the other one is full of metrics. And what those metrics are really dependent on who that client is, what's important to them, and what they actually have in their business in terms of assets or places that listeners might want to follow them to. So I'm going to share these with you, and I'm actually going to share them in order of increasing level of impact and how it relates to the bottom line. If you know anything about me, you know that we take a really strategic approach to pitching our clients. We typically don't hit it off that great with folks that come to me and say they want to be on these giant podcasts just from an authority building perspective. I think that's great. And I think you can obviously reach a great number of people if you're on huge shows. But at the end of the day, I want to bring our clients more leads. I want to connect them with people who are likely to buy from them. That's why I am sharing these metrics in increasing order of importance as it relates to kind of your bottom line. Okay, so the first metric that we track are followers, right? So we all typically have some sort of social media activity, whether that's Facebook or Instagram. I don't really track LinkedIn because I don't totally understand it, but I know I need to. So I feel like every episode I'm sharing with you guys something that I know I should be doing in my business, but I'm just not quite able to do at the moment. So typically we track Facebook followers and Instagram followers. And this is great because it is sharing with you the number of people that hear you and are interested enough to kind of get in your circle, right? They're not committing, they're not giving you their email address, but they are saying, okay, I am interested in sticking with you and kind of getting to know you a bit better. So we track those. And that's one that to me, it's a bit more difficult to know whether or not you're actually having impact with that because so many other factors play into it. Also, you're meeting people on one platform, right? A podcast, and asking them to go over to some other platform and follow you. And that just takes a little bit of activation energy, but it typically takes less than signing up for your email. So, as long as you're seeing a pretty steady increase in followers and that's important to you, then I would say keep doing what you're doing. If you are not seeing growth in those areas and that is important to you, then I would reevaluate what your call to action is and how you are actually weaving through the conversation with the podcast host, that you are active and what you are providing on those different platforms. So, followers is the first. Now, something that I had a lot of success with in my previous business when I was in the meal planning space was driving folks to my free Facebook group. And even when I had a free Facebook group for my current business, I was able to drive people to that group as well. So you can always measure. Facebook has this great little feature, I'm sure you know about it right now, where you can ask questions before folks enter your group. And one that I always asked whenever I had a Facebook group was, how did you find Angie? Or how did you hear about me? So I would recommend definitely doing that if something that's important to you is growing your Facebook group. Now, if you have that Facebook group optimized for sales, then that's a great way to get people in your funnel. For me, I knew if I drove them or encouraged them to join my Facebook group, I had it pretty well optimized for joining my email list and then ultimately selling them something of value. So definitely consider that as long as it is part of the funnel that drives people to ultimately deciding whether or not they want to work with you. And you can just measure that on a monthly basis, really. So, my clients and I, we check in once a month, and that's where we look over these metrics to see what kind of growth we are getting. And that is a number that I would definitely track month over month. Now, the next number is one that I love tracking on my own. We've never really tracked it too steadily, I guess, for our clients, but I'm starting to do that more and more because it is really the one that can be impacted the greatest and with the least amount of effort. And this is podcast downloads. So, for clients that host their own show, and for you as a listener that might have your own podcast, the impact that being a guest on someone else's show can have on your own podcast downloads is super great. So I have a great example, and it's a little numbery, but last year, so I just launched this podcast back in September of 2019. And I've seen a steady increase in downloads, which is super exciting. And I know the majority of that has come from me consistently showing up on other people's shows and letting the folks who I am talking to on those interviews know that I have a podcast of my own. So that is very much a part of my call to action. So I was looking at my data last December. I obviously published the show. I publish episodes once every other week, so a bi weekly schedule. And at that point in December, I was getting in terms of downloads between like 60 and 70 downloads every day that I released. So every other week, I could kind of see in my Libsyn hosting account a really consistent number of listens. So on December 3rd, I released an episode. It was episode 8. It was a pitch review, how not to go pitch yourself, which I need to do another one of those. And that episode got 67 downloads on the day of its release, and that was a Tuesday. So, in the off weeks, so the weeks that I wasn't publishing a new episode, my average number of downloads was anywhere between 7 and 11, crushing it, right? But when I looked at my numbers in December, and this is why it's always important to look at your numbers, no matter what metric you're talking about, I noticed that I had a spike in downloads during an off week. December 10th, I had 49 downloads of the Go Pitch Yourself podcast. And initially, that was kind of interesting to see and to see that there was a bump in that. And then I looked a little bit deeper into some of the work that I had been doing, being on other people's shows. And I realized that that was the very day that my episode on Carol Cox's podcast, Speaking Your Brand, that's her show. I was on episode 150, and we talked all about podcast pitching and guesting. December 10th was the day that that show released. So people listened to me on that show, likely jumped over to Go Pitch Yourself and listened to my podcast. And that's how I got, 4 or 5 times as many downloads that day than what I was normally getting. Now, you might be thinking, well, that's great. You got this one-off bump in listenership. No. So the next week, when I released another new episode, remember previously I was averaging about 60 to 70 downloads per new episode. My downloads on December 17th, and hello, people were probably home for the holidays, was 95. So it wasn't just that I was getting new listeners on the day that my episode on someone else's show went live, but that those listeners were very well aligned. So again, I'm pitching to shows where I know the audiences are likely very well aligned with what I do and have a similar host in terms of energy and personality. So those folks that listened to me on December 10th from Carol's show liked, I guess, what they listened to. And then they stuck with me and they listened on December 17th when I came out with a new episode. So this is one of the biggest growth metrics that you can actually see if you host your own show and you are guesting on other people's podcasts. So we are actually, one of my current clients, she just launched a show, Nikki Roush, go listen to it, Sales Maven podcast. And I think I'm going to track her Libsyn downloads. I'm assuming she's in Libsyn. We'll have to see. But I'm going to start tracking the downloads on the days that her guest episodes go live. So I'll keep you posted into what I see as we sort of take over that piece of our client work. But just know that if you host your own show, being on other people's podcasts is a great way to drive listenership of your own. And again, if you have your podcast optimized, right? My podcast, spoiler alert, is a very great part of my sales funnel. It helps my listeners get to know me, to really see me as an authority and get a feel for whether or not we would ever work well together. So keep that in mind. It's a great place to drive people. And when you're on shows, it's important to make sure that you are driving listeners to places that you have optimized for ultimate sales down the road, right? You don't necessarily want to just send them to I don't send a lot of my listeners, like when I'm on someone else's show, I often don't send them to social media, definitely not to Facebook, because it's just not optimized for me. But my podcast is. And so that's where I choose to send them. Quick pause here, friends. I want to let you know that my team and I have increased our capacity to serve more one-to-one clients. As life and business has shifted over the past few months, we have seen a lot of businesses' planned visibility opportunities shift as well. And many folks are turning to podcast guesting as a way to connect with new audiences and to continue to grow their own network. So, if you know that you want to increase your visibility and you don't have the time or know how to do it on your own, why don't you schedule a time for you and I to connect? You can do that quickly and easily by going to angietrueblood.com/services. I would love to support you in meeting your own visibility goals. All right. So another metric to measure is website visits, right? So you can definitely track where your website visitors are coming from, and you can see how many clicks you're getting per day. So we use Pretty Links as a way to track how many folks are clicking over to the download that we offer at the end of a podcast episode. Now, it doesn't give us information on how many actually signed up, but we are really able to gauge how many people were interested in that opt in and decided to jump from a podcast platform over to a website platform to check it out. That gives me a lot of information about, are we connecting with the right types of audiences? Like, are the audiences interested in coming back to us? Are they interested in what the download actually is? And there's an interesting way to kind of track that as well. But I would recommend, if you are not using a tracking URL of some sort, to be able to measure folks that are coming back to your website after they hear you on someone's podcast. So I know I've talked about it before, but Pretty Links is the one that we use, and it allows us to personalize the URL and then see how many people click that unique URL to come back to our website. So I highly recommend using that. If you are more skilled at Google Analytics than I am, there's probably some other super sneaky, smart way to track it. I just haven't gotten there yet, to be quite candid. All right, then we're going to actually talk a little bit about email opt ins, right? So that's typically what, at the end of an episode, we will offer the listeners a free download, and then we give them that personalized Pretty Link. So hopefully they'll click back over to our site. And recently, what I've been noticing, and I knew it all along, but what I want now more information on for my own visibility strategy is, I want to know how many people are hearing me on a podcast and actually signing up for my email list. And so what we have now done in my business is created a couple of different landing pages, and we're tracking them separately. So I have a landing page. It looks the exact same, but I have it labeled 3 different ways in ConvertKit. One for Facebook, because we're running Facebook ads, one for podcast or trainings that I give in other people's communities, and one for general website traffic. So now what happens is, when people come to a landing page of mine, typically, let's say we're talking obviously about me guesting on someone else's show, I'm going to drive them back to the landing page, to where when they sign up for it, they get tagged roadmap, which is what my current opt-in is. Then I can see throughout ConvertKit, that's the email provider that I use, I can see, do those people stay on my list? Do they open my emails more so than folks that might have found me through a Facebook ad? Do they buy my Go Pitch Yourself course, right? All of those things are numbers that now I really want to track, because we are upping the energy and the investment that we are putting into my visibility. And it's important to know where people are coming from. and how long they are sticking with me when they come from different places. So that is super important. It also allows me to know, is the opt in that I have created for podcast interviews converting differently? Is it converting differently when I share it with a podcast audience versus when I share it with a Facebook audience? And if so, do I need to have a different freebie to share with those different audiences? The jury is still out, but maybe I'll do an update episode. But that's something to think about if you want to measure actually the number of opt ins. Pretty Links will let you get a good sense for which of the shows that you have been on have gotten interest and had people hop over and click. But if you really want the minutia of, okay, are people actually signing up? You've got to do that through your email provider. Now, I could get way in the weeds and create a new landing page for every single podcast that I'm on and tag folks appropriately. But to me, I just don't need that level of data. I mean, I could, but I think it would almost be one of those like shiny objects to where I would pay too much attention to it and it wouldn't really be worth the time to set that up. So I think what we've got set up is going to work and I will keep you posted. All right, the next thing, remember, we're increasing the level of impact that some of these metrics have on our business. So, email opt in is a pretty big one, right? If folks get on my list, I know the rate at which they tend to convert. And that ultimately ends up being dollars in our business. So, discovery calls are a very similar type of metric, they have a very similar level of impact. And on a lot of the shows that I guest on, I think of a lot of our clients who are service providers. One of the calls to action is to schedule a discovery call because sometimes the folks that are listening to podcasts are coming at it from a couple of different angles. Some might be more DIYers. They just might be in a position to where they want to learn from you and go implement themselves. But there are people listening to podcasts. Trust me, some of the clients that have hired me listen to my show and they will actually schedule a discovery call with you and hire you. So I always measure the discovery calls. And even on my intake form, really, for when folks are scheduling a call, I ask them, how did you hear about me? So that's the really fancy system for tracking discovery calls from podcasts and trying to get as detailed information as I can from them. Sometimes they'll just say a podcast, but then when I get them on the discovery call, I want to hear, well, whose podcast did you hear me on? Because that gives me a lot of insight into trying to mirror those types of audiences, right? Once you start to see trends and where people are coming to you from, then you can start trying to position yourself in front of similar types of audiences. So, if you are a service provider or if you hop on any type of one to one call with a prospect, it's super important for you to find out from them, where did they hear about you from? All right, so that's discovery calls. And I will also say with this, if you are offering that discovery call as a call to action and you notice that no one is booking with you, that also can create an opportunity for you to pause and think, hey, is what I talked about during this interview attractive to the folks that might want to hire me for an ongoing service? You can kind of see if it's not enticing enough for people to schedule that call with you. And so maybe it's the way that you position it at the end of an interview. Maybe it's the form that you have on your website is too detailed and asking tons of questions and it keeps people from actually scheduling. There could be a number of things going on there, but if you are consistently offering hopping on a call with you as a call to action at the end of your interviews and no one is scheduling them, then it really does require you taking a deeper dive into what is happening there. All right. The other thing that I have started to track is the number of interview requests that start coming to you. So, yes, I am actively pitching myself, I'm actively pitching our clients. What ends up happening once people start hearing you on other people's shows and listening to the amazing content that you are sharing is they want to share you with their audience as well. So it's really important to keep track of, well, how many incoming requests are you now getting to be a guest on other people's shows? And where did they hear you from? So maybe you know them, maybe they're in your network, and that's a piece of it, right? once your business BFFs start recognizing that you're on all of these podcasts, they kind of know, oh, hey, Susie is in the market to be a guest on a podcast. And I never even knew that. So it's almost giving permission for folks that book their own guests to ask you, because now they know you're in the circuit a little bit. But also, again, podcasters listen to podcasts. And so folks might hear you interviewed on a show that they listen to and think, oh my gosh, I have to have this person on my show. So you'll want to keep track of where those requests are coming from. Where are they first hearing you from? And secondly, a training request. This is something I've been seeing more and more in my own business. People are reaching out to me, asking me to come into their group and train their group on podcast pitching or how to be a great host when you host your own show and you are inviting guests on there. In fact, just this week, I was a guest in Natalie Gingrich's membership, the Ops Insiders for Directors of Operations. And I shared with them how they can pitch themselves to be guests on relevant shows. Now, that was something Natalie had heard me on other podcasts, so she knew I was legit. I had pitched her about 100 times. So she also knew I had a really good system in place that could be helpful to share with her people. These things start happening as you start guesting on other shows because people get a bigger sense of who you are. So definitely track those and track the number that you start getting. And also, whenever you can get information on where people are hearing you and being introduced to you for the first time, it's super important. The last thing you might want to track is actual money. So, if you're booking discovery calls from podcast interviews, track how many of those you're actually closing. If you have a program like the Go Pitch Yourself program, and folks are joining that, ask them, where did you first hear about me? The majority of the folks that are in the Go Pitch Yourself program now heard me on a podcast interview. I would have never met them otherwise. And it's so important for me to know that obviously me guesting on shows is attracting the most amazing people. And I definitely want to keep that up, even as I am adding Facebook ads into my business as an attract strategy. I am not giving up podcast guesting at all. So if you can, track how much money you're actually bringing back into your business, either through paid trainings, like what I mentioned a bit ago, or through actual closed business. It's super important so that you can see, oh, the time that I'm spending doing this or the money that I'm investing into having someone else do it for me is totally worth it. Okay, so hopefully this was really helpful for you, not just to understand actually how to track your metrics, but the impact that podcast guesting can have on your business, all the way from some of the more surface level impact, like social media followers, to actually closing business as a result of someone hearing you on a podcast. So I would love to know if you are going to take any of this information, create your own dashboard to be tracking these metrics as you start guesting on more shows. If you are, I would love to see a screenshot of that system that you come up with. And then you can share it on Instagram stories as always and hashtag it, Go Pitch Yourself. All right, guys, happy pitching. So, are you looking for a little more support in your own visibility game? If you're not sure who to pitch, you don't know what topics to pitch, or you legit don't have the time to do it yourself, then consider this your invitation to hop on a discovery call with me. My team and I work with our clients in a couple of different ways, and there is a very good chance that I've got something to suit you just perfectly. So to learn more about the services we offer and to book a call, you can hop on over to angietrueblood.com/services. I look forward to connecting with you. Alrighty, pitches. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Now it's time for you to get out there and go pitch yourself. Don't forget to head on over to the website for show notes, downloads, and links to any resources we mentioned in this episode. The website is angietrueblood.com/podcast. Happy pitching!